Good morning, everyone. It's morning. It's 1 a.m. I'm here from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm here in D.C. from Boston, Massachusetts because of the pain, the ache in my heart over gun violence. I am a Christian minister, been involved in youth service work for over 20-something years. Started out really being a core member in an organization called City Year, and just doing community work and bringing people together from different backgrounds for most of my life. And now I'm 50 years old. I started out when I was 19, 20 years old. What breaks my heart even more is that we actually need to have a filibuster, and that's my Bostonian accent. I can't do anything about that. But we actually need to have this in order to address something for me that is, it's obvious. It's obvious that we need to address the issue around gun violence in our nation. And for me, it's a little personal. I was raised in Boston, Massachusetts, in Roxbury, and I was a teenager during the 90s when, in the 80s when there was a lot of drug wars, and I recall the nights vividly of gun violence ricocheting through around the buildings around my bedroom, and me dropping to the floor as a little girl and saying, I would never want to live in this place again. I want to move far away from Roxbury, Massachusetts, and I never want to look back. It's because at 12, 13, who should see bullet shots or afraid that a bullet may fly through your window and kill you? And I think it's something that as a nation we need to pay attention to. You know, in the years past, people would say, well, those are the people of color, the black people, the gangs, the Spanish, the blacks, those people, they have gang activity or on drugs. But now we're seeing that it's affecting everyone. It's not only in predominantly communities of color, because now we're realizing violence. Violence is striking from everywhere. And there's something that as a nation we need to wrestle with. We need to wrestle with what is it as a nation that is unresolved, and who we are and the fabric of our nation that allows us to politicize something around how to keep children and families safe in our neighborhoods across the country. It is not something that we it's an obvious place. It's an obvious thing, and it's time for, I'm excited about this space because it gives the people a voice to speak to what is it that we desire, what do we want, and to speak to Congress and say act. But I'm also saying to the people, we don't have to wait for Congress. We can also act. That's the power of our democracy, we the people. So when Congress if they're not doing what they should do, then we need to speak and act. How can we come together as a nation and address these issues, the issues around violence and how it's plaguing us? And also just the unresolved work that we have in our hearts around civil rights and race, classism, all of these things that we as a nation, we say we're dealing with those things in pockets, but actually the deep heart work, it's difficult for some of us to enter into it. But I think that we've been given an opportunity in our nation to address it, and I'm talking about it because what is it that is in someone's heart and soul? First, that they would get a gun, an assault weapon, to kill others, and secondly, what is it in us that would start to cause us to be so numb that it's every day? I'm not sure we respond to the violence in the way that we should respond to it. that will lead us to a place of action. I think that it's become, which is actually not good for us, I think, as far as trauma is concerned. We've normalized violence and seeing these things, that it's just become a norm. Oh, it's another shooting. It's some other violent act that's taken place. But we need something. We don't want to wait until it's a massacre in a way that we are so traumatized as a nation that we're destabilized. We need to take this moment and say, what is it that we need to do to stop it? And how do we need to act around laws and protecting people with guns? But also, how do we inform our people? How do we heal the people so that we know how to deal with violence? And I'm laughing because I was visiting a friend, and I'm thinking of her daughter was watching Daniel the Tiger show series, and it was talking about showing little children what to do when you're mad, how not to deal with your anger. And I think we all need to watch Daniel the Tiger as a nation. There's things that we need to figure out. How do we deal with our anger? Just because you're angry doesn't mean that you have to hurt someone. And I think that was the sort of the components of the song. Just because you're angry, you don't have to hurt someone. So we all need to take some time, spend time watching Daniel the Tiger as a nation, and really reflect on what is it that's in us that causes us to become angry, that we feel that we have to take to violence. And I know that there's mental illness and other factors is at play, but there's other things that we just should be sensitive to and be aware of it. It shouldn't be the norm. It shouldn't be the norm in our country. I'm also a person, how it affects me is, unfortunately, I'm one of the people who have a relative who was a victim to gun violence, a cousin. During the 90s, he was shot while he was walking. And I was actually excited for him because I thought he would have an opportunity to move away from the place that was a lot of gang activity, but unfortunately he didn't. The life that he lived, the gravity pull of where he was from, it wouldn't let him go, until the point that he was actually gunned down himself. I'm saying it, that I'm sharing these stories to say we shouldn't have to share these stories as civilians, as residents, as cousins, as mothers, as fathers, that we have victims of gun violence because of whatever reason it is. School shooting, gang activity, domestic violence. There's so many different ways that assault weapons and things are being used in our nation to bring about trauma. We've reached a point, a tipping point in our nation where we must act, we must respond. So the call of the Congress is to listen to the voice of the people, but the call to the people is to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it as citizens? Not waiting for Congress to act. And I think this is an opportunity for it. But it is an issue it's a heart issue. And I don't think that we can afford to have a generation wiped out due to violence because of our inability to know we can't politicize issues dealing with urgent matters around violence. And I hope the only thing that I can do, I was laughing, is I know we have a lot of different people watching from different faiths, or people may be agnostic, so you may meditate, but we need to pray. We need to be in a place of, as people, really becoming introspective and meditating and in prayer and thinking about what is it as humans that's causing us as a society to see this as a norm. And how do we need to be good neighbors and pay attention and act, watch, intervene, but then also learn and heal. How do we help each other do this together? I think the isolation is killing us as a people, as a country, as a world, because we're all sort of becoming plagued by just the issues. I don't know about you, but I'm so tired of seeing these images of people being shot, or bloodied massacre of children, or of any individual churches, people, religious synagogues, the mosques, all these places. I think there was a Buddhist temple as well. I think at some point we have to say we don't want to continue to see these things. The images. We want to remember people, but I don't want to remember people. I don't want to see a person, a child, most definitely shot to the point where they should have never felt or experienced a bullet, the feeling of a bullet in their bodies. So I think we've definitely entered a place. When I was on the train, coming here from Boston, I was just thinking how odd it is that we would actually need to have this space for something that we can all just say, come together as a nation and say we need to address these things, and we need to do it right away. But also not afraid to deal with the issues, what's led up to those issues. And I do think when Dr. King talked about a beloved community, you know, some of us think those issues the terms are so aspirational, they're unattainable. It's utopia, a beloved community. That's not possible. It actually is possible. Doesn't mean it's a utopian society where everything is perfect. It just means that you and I are sensitive to our neighbor, regardless of whoever our neighbor is. And as a minister, I'm a Christian minister. As a Christian minister, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, the scripture tells us that the commandments are fulfilled in two of the laws: is loving God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself. That if we did those two, if we practice those two things, then we fulfilled all the laws and all of the law. And so loving your neighbor. In one text it said, how can you hate your brother and say that you love God? It's impossible. Because you can't say I love God and you've never seen God, but then hate your brother or your sister or your neighbor. And it's something for us as a nation to think about, the seed of hate. But some of those same people will say, I love God, but then I hate you. And it's not possible to say I love God, but you hate your neighbor, or you hate your brother and sister. And I'm using the term brother and sister and talking about all of us in humanity. Because in the text it says that we were all created in the image and the likeness of God. And the persona and the being and what God represents. So for people who say that they love God, for those of you that say you do, but you can't see the injustice of what's going on with gun violence and can't pay attention to what's happening to your neighbor, then I'm going to ask do you truly love God? Because my understanding is that we would be sensitive to how gun violence is affecting not just one particular, but all of us. That we're not just listening to it when it's in a particular community, but we're sensitive to gun violence or violence in general. When it's dealing with women, domestic, when it's dealing with gang activity in the city, or even police brutality. There's so many different issues that we all should be sensitive to, and not write it off to saying, well, that's that group, because they need to deal with their issues first. They need to deal with the violence in their own communities. But I think we've all said it in different ways. That's that group. They need to deal with that. I remember talking to someone, and they said in Boston we have, which is the issue in the nation as well, but unfortunately we have a place in the city on Mass Ave that unfortunately people refer to as a methadone mile. In the church where I attend, they renamed it Miracle Mile, but it's called Methadone Mile. And, I've heard a lot of different stories about how people respond. And there's one group that said, well, they didn't even think about us. Now they want us to pay attention to these drugs. They didn't think about it when it was just with the black people or the Spanish people. Now that it's affecting white people, now we want to address it. I'm using this as an example to say that we can spend a lot of time pointing fingers around violence, around who, now this is happening to you, now you want to do something about it. And it's true, and you can say, I told you so, or you can say, won't you join me at the table now? Because now you can see that all of us are connected in our humanity. That when Dr. King said, a threat to justice anywhere is the threat to justice anywhere, everywhere. That if I'm hurting, it's just a matter of time that it will just seep over into your neighbor, into your neighborhood, into the other side. And I think, into the other side of the railroad track, I'm trying to say. Excuse me, it's 125. But I think it's as citizens, it's not a time for us to point our finger and say, now you want us to pay attention to this. It's a time for us to say, the table, everyone can sit at the table to really wrestle with the issues of gang violence as well, but gun violence. And it's complicated. We feel that it's complicated, or the complexities of dealing with these issues systemically, but actually it's not as complicated as we make it out to be. There's certain decisions that we can make regarding laws that can address some of these issues immediately. There's some things that systemically will take time because it's dealing with mental illness, issues around isolation. How do you deal with anger, accountability? There's so many different areas that address these issues as far as young people, as far as older people, hate crimes, whether it's someone who felt that they were bullied. There's so many different, when you look at the person of the perpetrators, of the people who are responsible, they don't fit a particular mold. They're all from different, there's one mold that's consistent, one part of their mold that's consistent, and that's violence. But you have hate crime, you have people who they felt there was hate connected to it, but they felt that they were bullied, or they were outsiders, or there's a lot of different factors at play. But I think it just shows all the different layers of how just with us as humans, it's complex, but as far as laws are concerned, it's not complex. The complexity, it's very, the gray areas with us as humans and how and relationally, but legally, there are things that we can do to ensure that no child will have to hit the floor or dodge a bullet the way that I did as a child. And crying, now I'm at a place where I'm able to be in Roxbury, but that moment did something to me as a little girl. I said, as soon as I get the opportunity, I'm moving out of Roxbury. I'm not going to look back. What I did was I did move away, but I returned as I was doing work in ministry and working in the city of Boston. And it reminded me of where I came from, to love my neighborhood, to love my city, and to look at, and also to pay attention to, not what was in me to have me run away, but I had to return and to say, actually, as a Christian minister, the person that as far as Jesus is concerned, those are the people he went to, the people who were considered poor, the people who were marginalized, the people who were rejected by society at large. Can anything good come from Nazareth? And so I had to remind myself of sort of all of the principles and what it means for me to be a leader and a servant. So so that whole process of going back made me think about those years and serving in the community, of saying I never want to go back, and I remember vividly crying that night, and during the day as well. It was night and daytime that we would have to deal with bullets flying. And it definitely affected me even more in my teen years when my cousin Keith was shot and killed. And it was traumatizing to us as a family. And some people will say, well, Keith was involved with gang activity. But what I say is, I don't think what I said earlier is not confined to one particular area. No young person, no young adult should have access to weapons in a sense that they can harm other people or murder them. And he did, and others did. And it affected his life, and it cost him his life, but it didn't have to. So I just sort of presenting this time. You all are, everyone here is watching, are blessed today. You're lucky. You're going to be stuck with me for the next few hours, and I feel blessed myself to be here to really speak about just something for us as a nation or as a people to say we're going to fight. We're going to do something about issues of gun violence. So I'm going to take a few breaks, but I'm going to keep speaking until like 4 o'clock, and then we'll switch to someone else. But just sort of giving everyone the heads up. I was laughing about this. The only time I've done something like this is actually not for social or political issues. This is definitely for prayer. And inside smiling, saying we as a nation need a lot of prayer. A lot of prayer at this moment. But we'll talk more about prayer later. But I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to come back a little later and continue our discussion around our response as how we as citizens need to make a decision to act now. So thank you, and I'll talk to you guys again in a few minutes. Hi, I'm LaTonya Brown. I am a Christian minister, and I am a true Bostonian. I like to say true Bostonian because not many people who live in Boston are from Boston, which is strange, right? Because actually it's not, because Boston is a city of champions. Many of you all across the nation probably wouldn't like to hear that, but we are considered a city of champions. We're a city of firsts. First public school, first public park, first train system. There's a lot of firsts there. And very proud to be Bostonian. Just excited to be a part of sort of the new Boston. Boston has changed a lot. The demographics, it was once known as a predominantly Irish, not predominantly, but very strong Irish influence city. And it still is. However, the demographics has changed. It's becoming a very diverse cities by neighborhoods. The leadership of the politically and business, and also in education and other areas is becoming pretty diverse. We still have our challenges as a city, but we're also becoming, the face of Boston is starting to change, which is a beautiful thing for Boston, being sort of the place of the birth of revolution of our country. And it's interesting that I start off that way because I was thinking about the right to bear arms, the birth of the revolution of our nation and the right to bear arms. And we have to start to ask ourselves about the Second Amendment now, the right to bear arms. The funny thing is, I was listening to someone on the street, not on the street, I was on the bus on the MBTA in Boston. It was some years ago. And the person was joking. He said to the bus driver, he said, now he actually wasn't joking, but it became a joke to me. He said, well, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, so the right to bear arms. And he was not joking. He actually thought that it was a part of the Ten Commandments in the Bible, the right to bear arms. And I just said, wow, this is not good, not good at all. But we, as a nation, I think we've come to a place of really thinking we need to think about at what cost we can have the right to bear arms, but what cost do we give access to anyone having assault weapons? And is it worth it for the right to bear arms? I think as a nation, it's symbolic to some of our freedom. I think our freedom, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal by our Creator. I think the equality that we're all created equal by our Creator, I think that's where the place that it's the truths that we need to wrestle with as a nation. I don't think the right to bear arms should be symbolic or representative of our independence or of our ability to declare freedom as a nation. But it's something that if our freedom is associated with guns and our independence, then I think we need to think about who was the freedom for and what was it about. if it's about equality and freedom, and it's about the people, not just about bearing arms. But it's something for us to reflect on and to think about as a people. At what cost are we willing to have people? I remember reading an article some time ago around road rage, and that actually, and I couldn't believe the statistic. And I don't remember who actually did the the data, but basically it said 95% of Americans suffer from road rage, and it was frightening to me. It was frightening to me because of how quick we could go to a place of violence or anger because someone cut us off, or if we're in traffic too long. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's also issues of violence around someone being shot and killed over issues related to driving or parking, or the cars being bashed in, or other things. I think all of these things are connected to, there's a political part of all of these things, but as a people, there's other issues around violence that's connected to our inability to sort of ask ourselves, within ourselves, what is this sort of thirst that we have to look at things that's violent, and to actually see it as an outlet, and to feel that it's okay, that it's fine for us to just accept violence as a norm. And I guess, some people who are for not having more strict gun laws would probably say, well, it's about protection as well. I think as far as there's just a cry for America. Who will she become? How will history speak of her? And I think we're at a place where we have control over, we're not control, but we can affect how the story is told to generations from now, who we are as Americans. How do we want to cause our democracy to advance this concept, this framework of America, or what some call it experiment, this old experiment of America? How do we want the story to be told? And that's up to us as citizens. What is the story that we want to be told of America? And how will generations afterwards speak of the story? Because all of our stories are connected to it, to the story that generations will speak to now. How did we tell the story around massacres of children and people in worship? How will we tell the story? We must decide to tell the story. We actually are without any excuse as a people, as humanity. We have access to technology, the things that we can do now, AI and electric cars, and just so many other things that at the beginning of the civil rights movement, these things were non-existent, or they were in the framework or in someone's thinking, but not in how we lived and operate operated or functioned as people. So all of the advancement in technology, but in matters of dealing with our heart or issues that deal with our humanity, we're still struggling with it. It's still difficult for us to get the no-brainers. We need to do something about this. We need to control how our stories are told, how the story of America will be told for our generation, and own it. I know when a lot of the protests and things were happening, people were saying being on the right side of history. I think the right side of history is really around how we tell our story of this generation. The generation of America now. It's sad, it's disappointing or heartbreaking. I was looking at an article, I think it's in the BBC, and it said in 2020 alone, more than 45,000 Americans died at the end of a barrel of a gun, whether by homicide or suicide, and more than any other year on record. And so I think that as a nation, and what they did internationally is they compared it to other nations. I think our obsession with our Second Amendment has caused us to become blurred in how we see ourselves as a people and what we represent to children, to other people, to people of other nations around freedom. But we can't figure out, for some reason, it's difficult for us to come to a place where we can work through the issues of having more strict laws around having access to guns. And I happen to be from a state where there are strict laws in Massachusetts, but that list is still pretty small as far as our nation is concerned. So I think there's a call to Congress and also to the people saying, what do we need to do to protect our children, to protect women, to protect people who can't defend themselves, or protect people who are hurting and either want to harm themselves or harm others. It's time for us to act. It's time for us to respond. And it's time for, as a nation, for us to take ownership of the violence that's happening in our community. And we're saying and we're speaking, and we're speaking to Congress. But as neighbors, we need to own it. We need to own our community. As citizens of cities, we need to own our communities, our cities, and say no more. No more we're going to allow these violent acts to take place, and that there isn't anything we get ourselves in a place where we say we're not going to really go to the root of the issue and address some of these things. So I think sort of what's on my heart in this time is really thinking about how we will decide to tell the story around gun violence, around gun law. Yes, it was is plaguing our world, our society, and a threat, actually. It's a threat to who we are and what we represent. But we decided, in our generation, we made a decision as citizens of America to come together and say we are going to own how history remembers us. And we're going to speak to this generation, to generations to come, about we all should have access to life. And that's actually what it's about. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And equality. And what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have your freedom? What does it mean to have, to be happy? And life, we don't think about other people's life. I started this thing some years ago, and I'm actually forgetting the terminology, but I was reading the actual phrase, not terminology, but the actual phrase. I was reading, I think it's the field book of the Fifth Discipline, and the opening talks about, and I'm not sure whether or not it's Swahili. I'm blanking on the actual phrase, but the language. But it basically, the meaning of it is, it says, "I see you." The greeting of hello in the particular language, it means I see you, and by saying I see you, I bring you into existence. And it struck me so much when I was reading it that I made it a part of sort of my purpose as a person, that as a woman, as an individual, that whenever I see someone, and especially people that we sort of deem as invisible, homeless, that I look at them and I ask them their name, and I say hello and bring them into existence. Because I think we live our lives and people don't exist to us. The mass shootings, I think that we should read the names of everyone and bring them into existence. At the schools, at the schools and the churches and in the religious synagogue, all the places where this has happened, read the names. That's what I do. Bring them into existence so that the humanity is there. And then ask yourself, do I want this to be my mother, my sister, my brother, my cousin, my grandmother, my pastor, my rabbi? Would I want this for anyone in my family or anyone in my neighborhood? Because when they don't exist, they're somewhere out there, or they don't exist at all. Oh, that's too bad. And I'm so sad that that happened to them. Well, we read it and we go on with our lives as if nothing happened. But someone, a mother, a father, someone has lost someone who that person will never be replaced. Whoever that child was, or the older person, or the younger person, or the teenager, they will never be replaced. They'll be remembered by them and others in their community. However, but to the larger group, they're not there. And it's for us as individuals to bring people into existence. And I know many people say their names. And it's what I started to do, but I look at their faces. I read their names, I look at their faces, and I bring them into existence. And it's what so in that homeless person, and by greeting them and saying their name, I'm just not just giving them money. Here, take this and go on, be on your way. I say, hi, how are you? My name is Tanya. They tell me their name. And if I have money, I give them money, or I say, God bless you. But it's important for us to look at people, to see them, to bring them into existence, and especially around the issue of violence, because it helps us to see the humanity of others. I had this experience some years ago where I watched a film. It's called The Two Towns of Jasper, and the story is a heart-wrenching story, but it's about, for those of you who don't remember, it's about a black man who was basically dragged to his death and decapitated in Jasper, Texas, and it was a racial, but the producers created this film that was brilliant to me, and I was really nervous watching the film, because whenever I would watch certain films, I would become angry as a black woman. But the power of The Two Towns of Jasper, I felt, it was a white crew that interviewed the white family of Jasper, the white families of Jasper, and a black production crew that filmed and interviewed the black families of the two towns of Jasper. But what the film did for me is there was a certain moment in the film when the father of the perpetrator, who I think that was either a skinhead or a part of the Klan or some, I don't recall all of the connections, but what I do remember is him crying and saying, as a grandfather, as a father, he didn't want his son to go to jail. To have those encounters, those experiences with people who are different from us, but also in light of what's happening, so it becomes real, and we don't write it off of something that it's not happening to me, so it's not happening at all. But when we take the time to look and say, oh my goodness, we can't allow this to continue to happen. We've got to do something about it. That's what bringing in people into existence, it's what it does. It causes us to act. And it causes us to feel, to sense the urgency in the act. And knowing that we can't wait any longer. Because it's life. Equality and freedom is about living. It's not about dying. And so as a nation, we have to give people, everyone, have the access, the chance to live. And definitely our youth and our children and people. But can you think about it? Being afraid to go to school because you may not live. You may get shot or killed. It shouldn't even be in our conversation of a child being afraid to go to school and afraid to learn, afraid to become scientists or lawyers or doctors. Fear that their lives may be snatched from them because someone may be angry or have hate for people of a different race, or they broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend and want to take it out on, want to, murder themselves and others around them. I think saying I see you and bringing those people into existence, the victims, unfortunately, and others around, even the perpetrators, I see you. I think it will help us as Americans to really own and to really say to ourselves, what do we need to do to intervene and to really stop the violence, to stop our inability to problem solve when it deals with politics. So the other thing that I was reading about articles is, in the same article by the BBC, it talked about how the American politicians are divided on the matter of assault weapons. And when I was reading, I said, but as Americans, we're not divided. So the politicians may be divided, but as the people, we're not divided. We're saying we want it to end. We're saying we want it to be resolved. And we're saying, I see you. Every single one of us are saying, we see you. And we will do whatever it takes as citizens to ensure that every child will not have to fear going to school. And that a woman, if she feels that, or a man, if they feel as if there's violence towards them because of their partners, that they don't have to fear an assault weapon being used against them to take their lives and end it, that they would be protected by all of our systems, that they would connect, interrelate in the way that holds all of them accountable. So I think it's something that we need to say it's it. We're going to do something about it. We're going to do something about it now. So my hope, that as you're listening to me, wherever you may stand on these lines, or maybe you're not standing on it, maybe you're one of the people that look at it and say, oh man, not another one, or you look at it and say, oh, and you just go on about your day. I think we've reached a point in a nation that we can no longer read something and go on about our days, or look at an article and just say, wow, not another one, and just go back to making dinner, or go back to working, or go back to the soccer game, because you don't know the next time you look, it could be you there, at your school, in the supermarket, in a movie theater, in your church, at a football game, at a baseball game, getting a petty or a mani, eating at a nice restaurant. It could be you the next time. So now we have an opportunity to address this with urgency. The issue related to gun violence, and really call on Congress to have legislation that will provide stricter laws around guns, gun ownership. Who should have access and who shouldn't. The waiting and just kind of saying, it's too bad that happened. We may look up and realize that someone is saying that about us. So it's important for each of us to do the soul searching that we need to do inside of our hearts and say, we're gonna own it, we're gonna act. We're not going to allow violence to affect us any longer. And we're not going to allow our own, our political views or things that we hold that are sacred, that are not really sacred. I sort of opened up by saying, some people probably didn't laugh because it's not really funny, but when he said, the Second Amendment, isn't that with one of the 10 Commandments in the Bible? He believed it. It wasn't a joke. He wasn't being facetious. He actually thought it was true. But for me, it meant it was really speaking to what we consider sacred, and owning a gun, and to have people have access to it. And I know there's other things around it. Is it worth it? And are we all willing to wait until for violence to come knocking at our door in order for us to act? I think that we've reached a place where we don't want to wait any longer. We don't want to be the person that sort of we pick up the newspaper and realize it's in our neighborhood. So I'm calling on all of us to pick up the phone and call your representatives, your senators, and say, now is the time to act. Now is the time for stricter gun laws. And now is the time for our nation to say, we're going to come together and work on these issues around beloved community. And I know every time I say it, inside I start to chuckle, because I know how it may sound to some people. It's like, oh man, here's this like minister, and she said she was a part of that whole Citier thing. All those people, they're like, the utopian sort of people, and it's actually not impossible, and it's not a fantasy. It's basically people working together on some of the complex issues that we address, but it requires working together and believing together that we all should have a seat at the table to have a discussion about America, not some of us. We're getting there. We're taking, sometimes we walk. Each generation depends on how each generation walks. Some generation decides, we're going to sprint for it. Some generations decide they're going to run a marathon. Some generations decide we're going to crawl. But I think our generation needs to decide how we're going to go after this and make it happen. And yes, it's a work in progress. As people would say, America is unfinished. But I think that as a nation, as individuals, we have to say we can do this together. And so yes, it's about more strict gun laws, but it's also issues around violence and mental illness. And what is it in our society that's causing people to want to escape? Why is there a place called Methadone Mile in Boston, one of the small but prestigious cities in our country, that people are embarrassed to talk about it? But it requires us to deal with the complexities of those things, but some of the things that are not so complex that we can address. And that's what the Civil Rights Movement did. It addressed laws that were keeping some people away from having access to vote, or separating us from enforcing Jim Crow laws, separating us and not having equality in education. So laws were changed, and it's up for us to deal with the heart issues, because the laws don't really address issues of the heart. But it gives us a chance, at least space, so that we can all deal with matters of the heart. And that's what stricter gun laws, stricter laws around people having access to guns, would give us an opportunity in our generation as a nation to really deal with some of the issues that's going on in our ecosystem that is sort of that's leading or driving people to violence. But if we don't address it, well, we don't want to wait and to continue to have. We don't want, what we do not want is for us to be in a position where there are multiple mass shootings or copycats because we refuse to really pressure Congress, legislators to make the laws. I think even in light of everything, I'm excited about all the possibilities that we as Americans can really say that we're going to do the hard work. That's the hard work. It's hard, but it's not as hard as we make it out to be. But it is hard work because it's about relationships and getting to know people from different backgrounds. That's what I enjoyed about my time at City Year. It was the framework was, so you take these 10 to 12 young adults. There's 17 to 24-year-olds. They're from different backgrounds, races, socioeconomics, educational, and you put them together and you say, you know what, you guys, for 10 months, you're going to be in a team, you all don't know each other, and you're going to work in a school on a particular project. And you're going to run an after-school program together. You're going to be a team. And you're going to tutor. But in the after-school program, you have to organize around it. You have to problem solve around it. You have to plan around it, around the project. You have to plan around the project. You have to strategize around the project concept. And it forced us in our 20s to learn from people who, as at that time a young black woman from Roxbury, would not have been sitting across from a guy who was from prep school, who went to I think it was Nobles, or others who we're the best of friends now. And some of those people, I haven't spoken to them for years, but when I see them, it's as if we never stopped speaking. That we've been in contact all these years. Not all of them, but for most of them, it's true. I think America, we need something very similar, where we're all kind of forced to kind of work together, to have a conversation. And I say forced probably because I was a young adult when it happened. But the space for us to work through different things and to say we're all going to sit at the table and we have a problem that we have to address, and it's gun violence. There's a table over there. That's why I'm looking at that to the right. There's a table that's there. And we all can sit at the table, every single one of us. And unfortunately, strict laws around gun violence is one of the issues that we need to address on the table. But there's other things as well. But the difference and the beauty of the cultures and ethnicities is what make us American. It's the beauty of our nation. And the beauty of our nation and what makes us Americans is why we have to protect it. And how we protect her is by ensuring that every citizen of America have a right to life, have a right to be safe, have a right to freedom. And the stricter gun laws will enable that. At least in a way give us space to work on the other issues that causes us not to see someone or not to know what's important. You know, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he and I are both in our leaders in the church together, and we're facilitating a day of racial healing. And he is a white male, but we were having certain conversations, and it was tough conversations. He challenged me, and I hopefully challenged him as well. But at one point, we had a conversation, and I challenged him because he, you know, his background is he's a suburban white male from a New England area, a New England city. And I challenged him, encouraged him, I should say, not challenged him, to spend time with people from the city where he lived. Those spaces and those conversations were tough for both of us because it challenged us. But those are the conversations that we need to have, those spaces. And he and I both respect each other even more so now because we're in that space together. And I think as Americans, we all need an opportunity where we're in these tough spaces with someone who's from a different background, where we can learn from them and we can hear what is it like being this person, being an African American woman growing up in the 90s in Roxbury. What does it mean? What was it like? And for me to ask the same of someone who's a white person, white woman or male, or a person from a suburban area, or not, or wealthy, or not wealthy. What does it mean to be who you are? And I think it just provides a space for us to understand we have to work at these together instead of having these staunch lines that defines us and say, I don't care what you say, I'm going to maintain my stance on whatever issue it is. But I think we've come to a point that we all have to give ourselves a space, provide space at the table for all of us to hear and to listen, to learn, and to act. Not just sort of talk about it, but really act. So it's a plea. It's a plea for all of us to really own the story of how our generation will be remembered. And what will they say of Americans? Because right now I'm not really proud of how history will tell us, will speak of us, because of our inability to address some issues that would help to not only advance us but strengthen us as humans and as Americans. So if you're up and you're listening, or you're listening to this later, make a decision to see someone, an American who you haven't seen, and bring the people who have been victims of gun violence into existence. Look at their pictures and read their names. When you look at their pictures and you read their names and you see that they're not among us anymore in life, it'll challenge each of us to ask ourselves, what is it that I can do to ensure that we are not affected by, that we don't allow violence All right, or allow, yes, we want to allow violence to plague children or families or communities any longer. I just feel, I don't know, I know everyone that's watching, or you have people who come from different religious backgrounds. I think we should take a moment of silence for the victims we haven't seen, that we make a choice to see them. And after the moment of silence, we'll take another little break. But now, we'll take a moment of silence. Every day in the U.S., 320 people are shot. 111 people are shot and killed, and 12 children are dead from gun violence. Every day. I think as a nation, it's time for us to say we don't want to hear these numbers again. Any number of a lost life is worth changing legislation over. I think we have to decide not to be numb. I always have this vision of us in our Western framework staring at our iPhones or I should say our smartphones, staring down at our smartphones, and nothing else around us is important. Only what's coming up in who liked something on social media, or the message that we received, or the text message, or the music, or how I look in my picture, my photo. But meanwhile, somewhere in our nation, a child was shot and killed. And someone was shot while we're going just being numbed by all the things that's around us that keeps us preoccupied, that we don't see others, that we don't see our fellow human, our fellow citizens, our fellow human beings. It causes us to be, and it should cause us to be shocked to the point when trauma happens, or violence, that it causes us that there's an outcry on the streets. But what is it going to take for an outcry on the streets? The numbers itself alone, 111 people shot and killed. I think that's enough for us to say every day. I think that's enough for us to say we need to stop. We need to change legislation. And we need to figure out how to bring healing to our communities and to our cities in order for people to not turn to violence. We can choose how we would want to act in this time. And I like to present to all of us that we really use this time as we start to speak to Congress about changing laws to really think about all of the the interrelated issues connected to gun violence in our nation, not just isolated to legislation. When we change legislation, I think that's a history that we have learned, or we should have learned as a nation. Legislation does not change how we respond as people to each other, as in a way of really learning our humanity. When we change laws, we're forced legally to provide access or space at the table. But it's our humanity that causes us, when we look at someone, to see them at the table. So we don't want to just force seats at the table. We need to look at the person in the eye and say, I see you at the table. For those of you all don't, in the previous recordings I talked about the phrase that was from Africa. I'm not sure, I think it's Swahili, but it's in the Fifth Discipline Field Book. And it's basically the greeting that says, I see you, I bring you into existence. It's something that I live by in my life. It's a principle. Whenever I meet someone or talk to them, I bring them into existence. I acknowledge them. I let them know I see you as a human being. I ask them their name, regardless of who they are. And it's something that we all need to do as Americans, as humans. Bring other people into existence. I think it will help us that when although legally we may have forced people to have a seat at the table for everyone, but seeing a person would help us to understand them more, their perspective. Who are you as a person? What are you going through in life right now? What's important to you? I remember I told someone, whenever people say hello to me, I say, you have to ask me 3 times to really know whether or not I'm actually doing okay. They say, hello, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine, how are you? And then you just keep walking. And then they would say, hey, no, how are you doing? I'm fine. And the 3rd time, how are you doing? It's kind of, it's been a little bit of a tough day. And the reason why I did that for myself is I felt most people don't really want to know how people are doing. They just sort of ask, how you doing? And hey, how are you? Fine. But if they said, hey, how are you? And they say, I'm not doing well, or I'm not fine, usually many of us are sort of thrown off and sends us in a loop. But I think it's time for all of us to start answering honestly how we're doing. But I think it's time for all of us to start asking ourselves that question as a nation. How are we doing? How are we doing that we can say that it's fine for us to actually say from our mouths that 320 people have been shot, that 111 people have been shot and killed? What is it? Why is it okay for us to actually say it and to give the statistics and to feel that we're knowledgeable about something when we don't have to present them that way? Well, we can present, we can speak of the numbers, but speak to the numbers of a violence in a way that in a manner of which we know that it will end, and we'll work And we'll work with our legislators and we'll work as citizens in order for us to never be in a place where we have to watch online or on news feeds on our news clips of children or families and mothers sobbing, weeping because they lost someone who's 4 years old or 5 or 6. And to something as senseless, it could have been averted. But we allowed, based on our inability to put laws in place to protect our children. And I think the statistic that I shared about violence, about as far as road rage for Americans, and this is my personal opinion, I don't think the answer to violence is another gun. I think the answer to violence is to ensure that other people do not have access, people who are mentally unstable or have a history of violence, not having access, ensuring that laws are strict so that they do not have access in order to harm citizens or their families or innocent people or anyone. And no one should have the right to judge or to say that someone is not innocent, to say that they should that they are subject to a person's punishment. None of us have a right to deem ourselves God or a judge to say we can take someone else's life because of how we felt that they lived or they didn't live as an ideal citizen. Michael Brown was a criminal, is what someone said. I said, oh, I guess our laws have changed, right? It's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. We've made the people guilty to justify brutality or violence. So what is happening to us in America? What's going on, America, as Marvin Gaye would say? Whatever is going on, it's something that's in us that's allowing us to. And I'm here at 3:25 in the morning speaking from Boston. I'm in D.C., and I love D.C. It's the power base of our nation. It's fascinating. I was smiling when I got off the train because when I walked out of Union Station, it let me out on Massachusetts Avenue. And I was like, that's perfect for what I'm doing now. Massachusetts Avenue led me right here to Washington, D.C. And it led me here in order for me to be in agreement with others who are speaking out. There are people in Congress and there are others, but more importantly, the people are speaking out and saying it's time for us to change the laws. It's time for us to really speak to our ideals and make them real for everyone. Not that it's a dream or a nightmare for others. Because for some people, America has become a nightmare because of injustice. But it's time for us as Americans to say, I see you. I see you. I see you in an urban context. I see you in a rural context. I see you in the South, on the West Coast, on the Northeast, in the Midwest, in Heartland America. I see you. We see you. To those who are victimized and to those that we want to get to know as Americans. And it's not as complicated as we make it out to be, but it's a choice that we all must make. I made a choice that I didn't want to hear stories of another young black woman, a young black girl from Roxbury experiencing what I experienced, and I'm seeing gun bullets flying by our window, or hearing it bounce or ricochet from and between the house where I was staying as a child, and being on the floor crying, saying, I never want to live here again. As soon as I get older, I'm moving away from this place. I'm not moving back. I'm sure I'm not the only one who cried that cry. But I'm sharing and saying it's a reality. Even at this moment, it's a reality for so many young people in our country, because of people who shouldn't have access to guns have access to guns. And it caused little girls like LaTonya Brown, who's now a Christian minister leader in Boston. It caused her as a little girl to say, I never want to be in a place where these people are. It's the neighborhood I was raised in. It's because people who should not have had access to weapons had access to weapons. It caused me to be afraid, and I lived my life as a child because of those in the teenager, but in fear, plagued by fear. And that's not how, when we say I bring you into existence or I see you as a person, we should never want our children, regardless of who they are or where they're from, to be plagued by fear. They can't live and enjoy being a child. They have to be concerned or worried about what they would see and what they would be exposed to, and what they would be exposed to, and things they shouldn't have been exposed to through violence. So please, let us all make a decision that we're not going to allow the numbers to be read again, the names from senseless deaths again. That we actually want to complete the work of the civil rights movement in our lifetimes. They're not complete, but we want to work on it. We want to be on the journey and continue to work on America together, so that we don't so we're not in a place. And for those of you that may listen to me, and I know you are saying it because it's in light of the work, our documents are not perfect. Actually, we need to get rid of them. Some people will feel that way. Constitution, I'm not representing the Constitution. And that's how people feel, but I feel, no, you may not be represented, because look at me, I'm a woman, I'm black, and I'm a Christian minister, and all of those things weigh on me and how I present myself as a person. There's some people I feel I'm judged by saying I'm a Christian minister, and there's some places I feel I'm judged or not looked on right because I'm a woman, or not accepted because I'm a black woman, or because I'm black. But I'm not the only one who have to deal with those issues. I'm sure some of you have to as well. But I think what's a beautiful thing about America is that we all cannot deny. First, we're all here. But second, we have an opportunity to work on some of the issues that is not making America live up to her ideals. And the powerful thing about the documents is that we can hold her to them. You said this is who you are. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal. And that means as citizens, we have the right to hold America to her creeds and hold her responsible, that how we function as a nation, who we are, that we live up to them. And our generation's got to do that as well. Not just when it's a hot topic or you're getting more likes, but the things that people don't see as well. You know, when you're getting to know someone from a different background. That's the hard work. The hard work is bringing someone into existence when no one is looking. Because we're kind of obsessed with likes, you know. But bringing someone into existence when no one can see us and how we're being a good neighbor, how we're speaking to our enemies, or someone who may appear as our enemies, or they may oppose us. How we speak to them, how we get to know them, how we make a decision to be around them will really define our generation. Because everything says to us, stay where you are. Stay confined to your ideals. Stay confined to your side of the railroad, in your corner of America, and let us continue doing everything that we're doing on our own. Now, everything that I read in my life, if I don't force myself out of it, or I have access to, reinforce my ideals, it strokes my ego. You're a black woman, you're beautiful, you're a Christian, you came from an urban environment, you know, all those things are being stroked and kind of, and what I'm reading from algorithms and other things. But we need some courageous people to step outside of the algorithms and all the things that's keeping us boxed into our veiled ideologies, and will allow us to remove the veils from our eyes and from who we are as people, and to actually get to know someone different, and to actually get to hear their stories. And what I'm excited about my life, I told the story about me participating in City Year years ago. But what makes my life beautiful, it's more like a mosaic. It is a mosaic. It's a mosaic of people from different backgrounds who are beautiful, different cultures, different ethnicities. It's not perfect. And the organization wasn't perfect. And there are people, and I'm saying that because it's true. But what was beautiful for me is I had to do some messy work that was not perfect, that with some amazing people, and as American who they're still in my life, that I have people who are Hindu, who's a good friend, that I have someone who is a Jewish person who considers himself agnostic, who's a good friend, and other ethnicities and backgrounds. But I made a choice to bring people into existence from different backgrounds. I hope that they can say the same thing about me. But it was a choice that I made, not to remain on a side, in a corner, where I couldn't understand someone from a different perspective, or from a different background, or from a different point of view of mine. So yes, let's change the laws, but let's also do the work on America. Let's do the work on her and cause America to be who America's supposed to be. And I think as we as Americans decide how we want to build the table, bring seats to the table, and we can speak to our generation and speak to the legislators will start to shape how we're represented in Congress. I think this is an issue where we can lead on, really speaking to the legislators and saying, no, this is how we feel as a people. And this is how we want you to respond as a nation to those who are in power representing us. I think, I wonder at times, those who were in the civil rights movement, if they were alive, who are not alive now, and other movements, would they feel that we've made progress? Would they have felt that we should have been further along than where we are now? Not sure. But I do know that for each generation there's something that keeps some groups from really being all that they can be, or all that they can be in entering into the fight of building humanity, building America, and bringing her and calling her into who she is as a nation. And I know these may seem the ideals may seem up there lofty to some, but I think it's a direct correlation to why we're having this moment, the filibuster regarding gun violence and having gun control, because it represents who we are. Because it's written in our Constitution about the right to bear arms. And so it speaks to our DNA of who we are as Americans. That the right to bear arms it's not the only thing that's written there. Written in the Constitution or in our amendments, or the Bill of Rights, or whatever, I can't remember. The Second Amendment. But it's important for us to really look at it holistically. What is it that makes us American? Is it a militia? Or is it independence or revolution? Or freedom and justice? And I think it's all the above. But I don't think militias are symbolic of freedom. They were leveraged at that time. And I'm saying it because of all the rhetoric around the Second Amendment. And I think that will help to secure our country, our communities, our children, our schools, and give us space to work on the other issues that's more important, that we actually live up to our creed, that we provide space for every child, every American. I think it's time for us to do that now. And I'm excited, even in light of all the violence and the work that I'm doing, and the stories that I've heard. There are people who believe in America. There are people who they're actually tired of hearing things that it's not possible. What they want to hear are the stories of the beauty of what it means to be America. And they want to hear the stories of the people who said, we're not going to continue to go in the path or swim in the direction of the majority. That we're going to say, we're going to go against the stream and say we're going to change our society and how we view ourselves in our generation. I think it's a call for all of us now. It's a call for me. It's a reminder for me to not to become complacent and not to become, as Dr. King talked about, not to become a conformist, to make a decision to be nonconformist. I think that's a call for all of us. It's a wake-up call for all of us. It's easy for us to conform to the status quo. So this is what everyone else is saying. I'm going to align with what everyone else is saying. But for us to make a decision to go against the status quo, that's how we're going to make change happen. To take place, I should say. And I hope you consider to, if you're in Congress, I hope we all make a decision regardless of where you stand political and what political power, what political party that you're part of, or your allegiance, that we think about America, not the party lines. As the children at the end of the day are not looking at a platform. I'm sure the children who over the years who've been shot and killed, if they could come back today to speak, they would say, get away from the politics and make a decision about life. And what does it mean to be alive? And what does it mean to have access to everything, and what it means to be American? That's what I think the children would say. From every school and all of the people in shopping centers and religious institutions. I think they would come back to us and they would say to us, get away from politics. Choose everything around this, around life, and living, and providing a space for everyone to be able to say, I have access to life, liberty, and justice in the pursuit of happiness. That's what we all want, or we desire. So as a person who's a spiritual leader, the beloved community is something that's real. It's not aspirational, but it requires hard work. It's not people who are high all the time, sit around thinking about a utopian society. No. It's really doing the hard work of what it means to be a human, and but it's also the beauty that makes us human. And it's also the beauty of who we are as Americans. And really working on those things together. When you say working on it, it's more of not working on it. It's more of kind of a journey with all of us together on it. You say working, it feels as if there's a start and finish to it, but it's a journey. And as we go on the journey, we're patient with each other on the journey. We don't try to cause someone to be at a certain place in the journey, because each of our journeys are individual. But the individual journeys are important for the collective journey of America. So we're all journeying towards the beloved community in America, or I should say America. I remember reading this book that I'm forgetting the name of, but it said Dr. King was the first person who took the framework of the American dream and took it away from personal attainment and made it about collective responsibility. And prior to him, whenever someone would speak of the American dream, it was mostly about wealth, or, you too can have a piece of the pie, a piece of the American pie. But what Dr. King did is he took the framework of the American dream and said, my children have a right to play at a playground just like your children do. My children should be able to swim in the same public pool that your child does, or have the same equal access to education, or should vote just the same as you're voting, your child would vote. So he took it and made it about collective responsibility. And that's more of what the American dream is about. And for some, wealth is connected to it, and it's more about resources, that we all have access to resources, that we all could have access to resources. We all don't have access to health care, have access to education. And unfortunately, many of us do not have access to life, to actually live. And now it's not just a subset of our community. We're finding out that it's affecting all of us, regardless of where we are. And the issue around the gun violence, the laws around gun control are, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for us to know that it's not a subset that's struggling with the issues of violence. It's all of us. And it's always been there. But we didn't see our neighbor. We sort of said, it's not happening here, so I don't see it. So it doesn't exist. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not true or it doesn't exist. It just means you haven't seen it. But how we all come to see it as Americans, see what's happening in Roxbury in Boston, or in other areas, Chicago, or in Atlanta, Georgia, or Columbia, South Carolina, or in California, and all these other cities across Kansas City. How we come to a place of knowing what's there is by listening to the people and getting to know them. And all of us ensuring that, no, we're not going to it's impossible for all of us to be billionaires or to become filthy rich. But it is possible for all of us to look at the American dream as providing access for every American to have access to what it means to be American, whether you believe it or not. There's a lot of people who say, well, American dream is a myth. And it is, but then it isn't. That's my theory. It isn't because it's alive, because people believe in it. So it's not a myth to some. But I think the creed and the ideals in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence, it causes us to, or it more compels us as a people to really sort of say, who have we become, and what are we not doing? What's wrong with us, America? And we've got to actually have a conversation about strict gun laws. What's happened to us where we think that we actually can allow this moment to pass without acting with, in a fierce manner, with fervency, in changing the laws to save lives. That it is my cry, my plea, as a citizen, not even as a minister, but as a citizen and as a woman. Wake up, America. Let us make a decision today to hold our legislators responsible for changing and making strict laws concerning who should own guns. It is not an issue of a party line. It is about we the people speaking and calling them to act. Because they've done it in the past, we can do it now. It does not make any sense for us to wait to read in the newspaper or to read another article of a child or someone being killed. Innocent bloodshed. It is a shame. Innocent blood shed. Children, people in worship centers. Innocent bloodshed. It is a disgrace, and it is why, as a nation, we must act immediately and call for Congress to make stricter laws concerning who own guns. And for me, as a person who's worked in organizations, that's low-hanging fruit. That's something that can be addressed immediately. There's no reason to delay. So as a person of faith, and I'm going to close out in a few minutes on my time here, but I can't say this is a gift, because I wish I didn't have to be here to have this conversation. Listening to me because you're still alive. They're not. And their families know it because there's a void there. So I'm here because my heart is broken as well. It is broken, and I'm tired of reading about it. I'm tired of reading about, and that's why I said I'll do this. I'll come here and speak. Because of a broken heart, and I'm tired of reading about children and innocent bloodshed and senseless deaths, when all we have to do is act as citizens and as legislators. So let's have another moment of silence for those who are not with us, and also their families, because of our inability to act, to change legislation. God bless America.